ARE Podcast, episode number 21.
Welcome to the ARE Podcast. ARE Podcast, where it's all about encouraging and inspiring you today so you can fulfill your dream of becoming a licensed architect tomorrow. And now your host. His idea of a romantic evening is watching the good, the bad, and the ugly. David Doucette.
Alrighty, welcome back to another episode of the ARE Podcast, episode number 21. In this episode, we are going to talk all about the job titles inside an architecture firm, and we're going to talk about what they do. And joining us for this insightful conversation is our co-host, Eric Corey Freed. Hello, Mr. Freed.
Hey, everybody. Good to be here.
It's good to have you here. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule. So...
I apologize for my hair. For those of you watching the video, it's just kind of, it won't go down.
It's very poofy. You know, that's sort of the rage these days. That and the long beards.
I knew I was in trouble when we were walking around and people were complimenting me on my hair, just out of the blue, unprovoked. So I knew, and they weren't the type of people I would, you'd want to get compliments from.
Well, guys our age to still have our hair is a good thing, so...
It's a blessing.
It's a blessing. It really is. Even if it does get a little more gray every day, but... well, yours is looking pretty good. Do you dye it?
Oh, yeah, I'm dyeing it now with shoe polish.
All right, so our job titles in an architecture firm, and one of the reasons we're doing this episode is so we can understand the structure of a firm or the structure of a typical firm and really know how the positions work above us. Because usually when we enter our job, it may be at the entry level or thereabouts, and we're not really aware of all the jobs and job titles above us, so we don't really know how it works. It's a bit of a mystery unless somebody sits and explains it to us, which is what we're doing here right now. So we broken them into sort of, I guess, what we call three main groups. So do you want to tell us what those are?
Well, they're pretty easy groups. The first group is the entry-level group, which is probably where most of our listeners are at. And then we have this kind of middle management, middle years group, where that might be your direct superior, might be in that group. And then we have what we call the senior level or full-fledged group, which is, the owner, the partner, the principal, and we'll get to those soon enough, I guess.
Okay, great. So we have the entry level, the middle years, and the full-fledged. And if we were going to just if we're just going to assign years to them, I would say entry level 3-4 years maybe would be considered entry level. Yeah, no more than 5. Yeah, for sure. At most. Yeah, if you're 5 years still in an entry level position, that's time for a new job. Yeah, you're probably doing something wrong. Yeah. Middle years, what, like 5 to 10 years, 4 to 10 years? Yeah, I'd say 5 to 10. On the outset, maybe 12, depending on the firm, and also what the economy had happened to be doing in that time, but 5 to 10, ideally. And full-fledged, whether it be an associate or partner, we're looking at least 10 years or more before we're given those kinds of opportunities. And the full-fledged term actually refers to that they have a vested interest in the firm. They have at least some sort of partial ownership, or they have a financial connection to the firm that a simple employee would not. And these are firms, when we're talking about these firms and these positions, we're talking medium to larger size firms, because obviously, as we talked about a couple weeks ago, the difference between a small firm and a large firm. These titles might be a little more stuck together. They might overlap a little more in a small firm. Yeah, at a small firm, you might end up in a certain day doing everything from basic old junior designer drafting all the way up to, holding the hand of the client. So the lines blur a lot more in a smaller firm where you're doing a little bit of everything. Okay. All right, so let's talk our entry level first, which is probably the level where most of us may be at this point in time. Who do we have in the entry level? What can we expect there?
Well, first we have, we've got three main categories under the entry level. There's an intern, a draftsperson, might be a CAD draftsperson, might just be basic draftsperson. And then the third is what we call a junior designer. And sometimes the draftsperson and the junior designer might even have the same amount of experience, but it almost defines the different roles that they play in the project.
So if I'm looking for my first job, my first sort of real position, I would be looking as an intern. And by intern, we don't mean unpaid intern, correct?
Well, no, technically they shouldn't be unpaid. There are still many firms that do unpaid internships, but if you're going to do an unpaid internship, it should be educational. I have very strong feelings about this. It always bothers me to see large firms that are doing unpaid internships and making the interns do billable work. In other words, they're billing the client for the work that the intern's doing, and they're not paying them. So if it is an unpaid internship, it should be at its most basic an educational one where you're learning the ins and outs of the firm. You get to pick and choose your hours. You don't have any direct responsibilities that are then being billed to the client. There's some pretty clear definitions of what an unpaid internship should be. But for the sake of this argument, yes, an internship would be your basic entry level. This is where they're expecting you to come right out of school, and they probably don't expect you to know to know that much, even though you probably feel like you know a lot because you just graduated.
Right, and they're willing to sort of teach you and show you, and really what's expected of you, I guess, at that point is just to show up on time and be at your desk when you're supposed to and all that good stuff. And they just sort of shuttle you. They'll tell you exactly what they need you to do.
Yeah, and you'll probably be doing things you've never done before. So my first real internship position at a firm, they asked me to do a foundation plan. And I'd never done one before. I mean, I guess we had talked about them in school, but I never really did one. And I remember this very clearly, the letters TOS, right?
Right.
And I was trying to figure, what is TOS? What does that stand for?
And of course you don't want to ask anybody because then that would mean you don't know, right?
No, but eventually I did. And I remember the look on his face. He's like, it's top of slab? I'm like, yeah, of course. I didn't eat breakfast. I forgot. I didn't know what you meant. Top of slab. Yeah, I use that all the time. So I remember that very clearly. But it was every day was a deep learning curve for me, and I just loved it.
And I think at that position specifically, whether it's an intern or even the draftsperson, if you're sort of out of school, your first job. We've talked about this on various episodes, but just being positive is probably the most important thing you can do.
Yeah, the interns really border on being more trouble than they're worth at times. So you want to walk a fine line. In one sense, yes, you want to be positive, you want to be open to new ideas, and you don't want to be pushy. But on the other hand, you also don't want to be only good at one thing, because then you could get pigeonholed as the 3D guy, right? Or the CAD monkey, and so you want to I guess stand up for yourself a little bit and make sure that you're more than just picking up red lines in AutoCAD.
Yeah, and I think that's actually a great point. You mentioned you're walking the fine line. You definitely are, and I think to your point, sometimes interns are more trouble than they're worth is a good point. It's important for us as interns to remind that we are providing value to the firm. But in some respects, they're doing a lot by accommodating us being there. They're teaching us how to work in a firm. So that's a lot.
Yeah, so you don't want any sort of sense of entitlement or attitude about it, especially when it's a buyer's market. The intern, you're the lowest paid member of the firm. You have the least amount of responsibility of anybody in the firm. It's your time to stand up and impress everybody else, not the other way around. So I've had entry-level people that we've hired. I had one that after lunch she would cry all afternoon because she was homesick. I wasn't beating her. I mean, she was just homesick. But this is an office. This is where everybody else is working here. You're disrupting everybody else. And I asked her repeatedly to get it together, and ultimately she couldn't. So you want to walk a fine line, and you don't want to be a burden on anybody as an intern. You want to be, I'm here to learn, I'm here to be open, I'm here to new ideas, say yes to everything kind of person. Otherwise, you'll find that you'll probably get booted out pretty quickly.
Yeah, definitely no complaining. And to your point, I think there is a way, and I think we've talked about this before too in various podcasts. There is a way to advocate for yourself, but do it in sort of a professional and polite manner. Obviously, we're not going to do that on day one and start demanding things. But after, we've been settled in for a bit, and if we feel like we're not advancing enough, we could go to our immediate supervisor and just let them know. And usually they're receptive to that kind of stuff.
Yeah, the almost the mindset that you want to have in any entry-level position, not just intern, but anyone, is what can I do to help you? How can I be here to help you? I see you're working long hours. What can I do to take things off your plate? How can I unburden you? And then learn in the same time.
Yeah, being a proactive intern that's great if you can do that. So the intern and the drafts person, are those at the same level?
No, oftentimes interns they'll be paid, but sometimes they'll be organizing the library. Sometimes they'll be running plots, and if they still make blue lines.
Do people still run plots?
But they'll be collating plots. They'll be packaging things up, putting things in FedEx tubes. A lot of management, admin type stuff, admin type work.
Which is a great way, actually. Especially getting your first job is tricky because you don't have the experience. So taking a position like that is a great way to get your foot in the door in a firm. And if you're good, it'll be sort of easier to move into the ranks. And
remember, the senior people will advocate on your behalf because they'll say, "Let's have the kid do it," and then they'll point over at you. And I always found that the best people to speak up for the interns were not the interns, but the other people that took a shine to one of the interns. Like, we like her, we like him. Let's throw them on it and see what happens. Because remember, let's just discuss the realities of it here. You're being paid, depending on where you are in the country, $12 to $15 an hour. Maybe, hopefully.
Yeah, thereabouts.
Right? And if you're doing billable work, they're billing you out at $55 an hour, so it's a huge profit margin. So they can afford to let you take a long time to do something. I used to remember feeling very guilty that it would take me 4 hours to do a reflected ceiling plan when I'd see other guys crank it out in an hour. And I said to the principal, said to my boss, I'm like, I'm sorry it's taking me so long. He's like, what, are you kidding? We just made a fortune on you, right? Because it doesn't matter at that point. There's a bunch of financial realities that you're probably not privy to or aware of that work in your favor as an intern. By being the lowest paid, you're also the lowest billed, and therefore you're not eating up fee. Whereas a senior person is probably being billed at $150 an hour, $165 an hour. They're chewing away fee much faster than you. So they kind of have to do things in a quarter of the time. I mean, just out of necessity.
Yeah, and as we talked about before, it's sort of any firm that hires sort of an intern or an entry-level person, this is all accounted for. They know that. They're just looking for somebody who kind of fits in and can help them out.
When I still have the what we call the wet ears, like still wet behind the ear type interns that just graduated and they're full of verve and enthusiasm, I don't expect them to know how to do anything abuse, really. Even in CAD, they might be good at drawing things in 2D AutoCAD or even 3D. But what they're not good at is they're not good at working in a team-like setting, managing a set of drawings, managing XREFs, doing file naming. I mean, I remember I had an intern. He used to name all his files his own name, dash whatever. So he would put like Travis dash roof, Travis dash plan, Travis. And I'm like, what the hell are you doing? Like, I was yelling at him, what are you doing? He's like, well, so that way you knew that I drew it. I'm like, I already know that you drew it because I told you to draw it. Like, why are you doing that? I was ready to kill him. He never did it again after that. Travis dash roof. I mean, that's crazy, right? That's nuts.
What an advertisement for people to just send you resumes. They want to go work for Eric Corey Freed because he's so nice.
Yeah, really. Everybody's going to be terrified to come near me now.
All right, so we got the intern, we got the drafts person, and the drafts person is a position, as we're talking about before, 0 to 4 years, possibly. I mean, there's people who just stay as draftsperson for a long time. They have no ambition. They don't want to get their license. And we need people like that. I mean, we need drafts people. But there are people, and you may know them in your firm, that they have no ambition. They might have a couple years of drafting experience, but they've just been working here forever, so they know how things work, but they have no desire to get their license.
Well, they probably didn't go to architecture school either. They're probably just they were good at drafting. Maybe they took even a vocational program in high school, and they just came out of the gate being great draftspeople. In fact, those kind of older draftspeople, you could actually learn a lot from in terms of managing a drawing set, and paying attention to how they put things together and how they quickly organize the files to create title blocks and detail sheets and all those other great things.
I will say, as we're talking about these entry-level positions, it's important to sort of keep our focus, I think, in the architecture realm, because we'll see advertisements for engineers, mechanical engineers who are looking for drafters. And we do have the skill set, I guess, to do that from architecture school. But it's not something I would do. I would try and find work in an architecture firm before I went that route, because kind of once you get in there, it doesn't do a lot for your architecture background stuff.
Well, it could also backfire too, because if you're working under a licensed engineer, it probably doesn't count towards IDP and ranking up your time.
That's true.
So I've had friends that they graduated, went to work for a contractor or went to work for an engineer, and only a certain amount of hours qualified for IDP. It wasn't a total washout. I mean, they were able to count some of the hours, but not 100%.
And that goes back to just being proactive about your own career and all that stuff.
Absolutely.
Okay, so junior designer. What is a junior designer doing here? Still sort of in that 0 to 4 year position.
Now, the junior designer. This is interesting. This is where you start to see the real divide in the profession. And I noticed this very early on. The first firm I worked at, I was still in school. It was a great firm. It was probably less than 20 people, so it was kind of, for me, a good size. But there were people upstairs. It was a 3-story building, and the people on the 3rd floor were designers, and they designed things. So they did schematic design, floor plans, elevations, these amazing perspectives. They were designers. They never did working drawings. And then downstairs on the 1st floor were the working drawing team, and they were cranking out working drawings, right? And this was in the 80s, by the way, so we used Mylar with pin bar registration and plastic lead pencils and sticky backs. Do you remember those, where we'd photocopy things onto these decals and stick them on?
Oh, yeah.
And so a junior designer, you start to see this divide between the designer track and the technical production track. And I was very aware of this, and I wanted to dance between both because I wanted to learn both. I didn't want to have to make a decision then. So I was doing both, drafting CAD and by hand back in the day, but also junior designing, where they would say, crank out 50 schemes for the trellis. And I would just quickly sketch out different alternatives for this canopy thing, or for the elevation. Do 10 versions of the elevation. I would crank it out for the other senior designers. So I was trying to straddle my feet, have my feet planted in both a designer path, career path, and then a production path, because I knew ultimately I wanted to have my own firm someday. Right.
Which just brought up an issue. I guess we talked about the intern level, entry level model makers, which is it's a distinct skill. But I think for the most part, model makers are a very entry level position.
Well, it depends. I mean, there's also the super expensive $50,000 professional model that is going to be displayed in the lobby of the bank, and that's usually an outside firm anyway that you hire. But yeah, internally, a model maker or 3D person would be a student. And again, it's down to billable rate and billable hours.
Right.
Much easier to have a young person spend 80 hours on a model than have a high billing person do it and eat up all the fee.
Okay, so there's our entry-level group. Intern, draftsperson, and junior designer are sort of, I guess, the three main positions in there in the entry level. 0 to 4 years, 0 to 5 years. After we're in a position for a couple of years, at least in a firm, we can start thinking about moving up. We start moving into the middle years. And what do we have in the middle years?
Well, middle years, you start to see a little overlap in the junior designer, because if someone's on a design path, a junior designer could just be called a designer at that point. But designer would be doing massing studies, all of the kind of preliminary design stuff, doing preliminary floor plans, maybe even kind of being the helper for the senior designer, who's probably the principal of the firm, but producing a lot of designery stuff and not probably working on production drawings. And again, this can backfire if you're looking at IDP, because I have friends that, for whatever reason, they were chosen as in this design track, and they have no experience on working drawings or field visits, and they can't get their hours in IDP for it.
Yeah, I remember I worked for Lee Hohenshaw Associates for 5 years in Boston in the mid-'90s, and he was essentially an interior firm, and he had a lot of corporate clients there in Boston, and I was project managing and stuff. So design-wise, we weren't designing much, we were space planning and all that stuff. But it was fantastic for my IDP credits because I was able to fulfill all of the requirements because we're doing a lot of technical stuff, coordination with consultants, all that stuff. So it was great for IDP.
Yeah. So and it wasn't like that was your master plan,
right?
Just a coinky-dink that it worked out for you that way.
All right. So then our junior designer, then a job captain, which is a bit of a coveted position, isn't it?
Job captain was probably my favorite role because it was the point where I started to feel it was really about responsibility and confidence. So I had a certain amount of responsibility at the firm for the project. I wasn't in charge of the project per se, but I was running it and I was pushing the day to day. I was the one that when the comments came back from the permit application, I was writing the response and changing the drawings and then reviewing it with the project architect or the senior associate, but I was doing the bulk of the work for it. And so it was really great because you no longer felt like a grunt. You really felt like you were contributing, and when those projects would be finished, you could really point to them and feel that you made a contribution. And oftentimes they'd give you whole pieces to just own. So my first job captain job, I remember I designed this curved staircase, and it took me forever. But I designed this curved staircase that was the entry-level staircase. And I remember them building the darn thing and then walking in and just feeling a sense of pride of, oh my God, I drew every one of those lines and all those connections and all those details. And so I was, beaming with pride. And then you start to realize, oh my God, here's all the things that I would do differently now that I've, now that it's done and I've learned my mistakes,
So that was job captain. So that's when we start to, I guess, feel our self-worth, feel like we're really contributing. And that's a position, it's going to take us 3 to 5 years to get there.
It's also probably the most desired position. It's the one the firms are looking at because a job captain is someone, especially based on building type. If I find a good job captain who's already familiar with whatever project type I'm working on, be it residential or healthcare or commercial or hospitality or schools, but if they already have experience in that project type, I know I could take a good job captain and just throw him or her onto the job, and they could be productive and billable and making things happen right away. So it's probably the one you see advertised the most because finding good ones are hard and keeping them is almost even harder.
So then that would actually be a very good let's say medium range goal. If I'm sort of an intern or am I a drafts person, my 3 to 5 year plan would be to have a job as a job captain somewhere. It may not be the firm I'm working at now, or if that opportunity doesn't exist, maybe I begin to look elsewhere at some point, but that would be a good goal. So within 5 years, if we're sort of new, we should have a job captain position. And if we don't, it's time to look somewhere else.
Well, this really goes back to this idea of having clear goals and being your own advocate for yourself. I've met many talented young people who complain, oh, at my firm, they still haven't made me a job captain. I'm still doing the same old stuff, and I'm good at it, so they don't really notice. And that's where their politeness almost is shooting them in the foot a bit, because they're not speaking up on their behalf, so nobody is going to. And so my advice to them is always, well, tell them you want to, tell them you haven't gotten a raise or a promotion in 3 years. Tell them that you can do your current job in your sleep, and although you're good at it, you want more responsibility, and ask for it. Otherwise, it might never happen.
And this is exactly why, we came up with the idea to do this podcast and wanted to do it, is so as interns or entry-level, young architects, we know what's above us, and so we can set our expectations. So, going in new somewhere, it would be not realistic to necessarily think you can be a job captain in 2 years. Depending on the size of the firm, things can happen, but generally, like we were just talking about, it's a 3 to 5 year goal. So it's just important to keep all of this in perspective.
Yeah, ideally, I think the way I always envisioned it, even with my own staff, is you're finishing up IDP, you're preparing for the exam and the AREs, and that's probably the time that you're doing job cap. I don't think you could pass the AREs without having some job captain experience, even if it's just 3 months, to be honest with you. Just because of what's on the exam and what they ask you, I think just a straight intern or draftsperson wouldn't be able to pick up enough experience doing it. In fact, I don't think you'd probably be able to even finish IDP.
Well, remember our friend Charlie Kletcha, who passed them in 7 days.
Yeah.
So he had, and I don't think I realized this till the second interview I did with him. He had no architecture firm experience, and he still got another 2 years of IDP.
Wow! Yeah.
Before he got but I think he was the rare case. Obviously, he passed these 7 in 7 days. So he's
but he's crazy.
Yeah, exactly.
He's a little nuts.
Yeah, I think the real world experience can definitely help with these AREs for sure. All right, so who do we have after job captain is the coveted role, and that position can last for a number of years, correct?
Yeah, so after job captain is what we call a senior designer, and I would say parallel to that is another role called a project architect. And again, this is the divide between a design track and a production track. The senior designer, the firm might only have one, for all you know, or they have a whole room, like the example I gave with my first firm, where everybody was on the third floor. But the senior designer are the ones that are doing the design, but probably don't know. Oddly enough, they probably don't know how to put together a permit set. Probably don't know how to review shop drawings, believe it or not, because their whole career has probably been on the design side of things.
And they might not even be a licensed architect.
No, in fact, most of them probably aren't. But they probably most definitely went to architecture school. Just they've been on the design side. And now, these are also coveted positions in firms, by the way, but they're much more rare and harder to come by.
And to your point where you were talking earlier, because I think all of us coming out of architecture school, working drawings is not the most exciting thing. We're all thinking we're going to get hired as, Joe Designer, right? Or Sally Designer. But like you were talking about earlier, the senior designer probably has a junior designer helping them do stuff. And that could be somebody in an entry-level position, 0 to 3 years. And then you can find yourself on that track. And like your friends you were talking about, if you find yourself on that design track, you're not going to be able to complete IDP. You won't have the technical experience to do it.
Yeah, I remember I was a junior designer, and I was doing Sky. I was put on Sky duty, meaning that he did a whole rendering, he did all the colored things he wanted. He's like, you finish up the sky.
Right.
And so I did, and I got really good at sky and water.
like Bob Ross, the happy clouds.
Like to this day, with markers and with a white colored pencil, I can make water just glisten.
And it's almost the sort of designer track. It's a bit of a drug actually for the entry level positions. It's almost like you're luring you over here, kind of not obviously the dark side, but luring you, because if you go over that too far, you're not getting your IDP requirement. So it's tricky. Yeah, it also depends on how the firm's structured. Some firms really push this. These are the designers over here, and this is production on this side, and it usually creates a divide, and in fact, almost a bit of a cultural divide within the firm itself. That was certainly the case that I noticed at a lot of
my firms when I was coming up, but I've since worked with other firms where it's very much more integrated, where they want the designers also to then follow the project all the way through to construction. So it depends on where you are.
In the message here again is so we as the intern or entry level person or working a couple of years in a firm understand how everything works around us, and if there are design opportunities, it's great to take advantage of them if they come our way, but keeping in mind we don't get blinders on, for example. All right, so let's talk about the project architect.
Now, the project architect is he or she is a production person who has a track record of completing projects successfully, on time, on budget, within fee, over and over and over again, and they're great at it. In fact, they probably introduced a lot of new systems in place to the firm, management systems, time management systems. Usually, a good project architect will have input on every aspect of running the business, from the contracts to the billing to even the proposals themselves of the scope of work that's being defined. They're also probably the true busiest people in the firm, in my mind, because there's a lot on their shoulders. They're managing at least one, if not several, job captains and maybe even multiple projects, and they're making sure that they're all running smoothly. There's a lot to learn from the project architect, but his or her time will always be an issue.
Yeah, the project architect, it's probably one of the most valued positions, I would think. Also dealing with the client, dealing with job captains, dealing with the principals. So they're trying to keep everybody happy. Not everybody can do it well, and actually, in fact, few people can do it well. So if you can do it well, you'll become a very valuable employee. And that's one of the things I would do as a sort of younger person working in a firm. I would try and befriend the project architect in some way, shape, or form. Somebody, try and build a rapport with them.
Definitely go to lunch with the project architect, because he or she will be the one to advocate on you to the principal and say, let's have her do it, let's have him do it. The project architect, by the way, also may not be licensed, if only because, ironically, they've been so busy, they haven't had a chance to finish their exam, and the NCARB rolling clock has probably bitten them in the butt at least once.
Exactly.
If not multiple times.
And, obviously we want to go to lunch with whoever we can. Job captain would be great too, but the job captain's not going to be advocating for you to the principals. As you mentioned, it's really the project architect that's who you want to, make
right.
happy.
Right. And then, I have a lot of friends who are project architects. They're career project architects. They're probably on path to be made associate or partner later in the future, if they haven't already. But a lot of them are not licensed, because they're probably at a stage in their life where they're realizing, I'm over 35. If I'm not going to start a firm now, I'm probably never I don't need a license. And then this ends up biting them in the butt later on when they're made partner and suddenly they have to go get a license quickly.
Wasn't there, this was probably 10 years ago, one of the partners, I think it was Skidmore, Owings & Merrill, correct me if I'm wrong, where the guy who everybody thought was a licensed architect was working there for years. He was either a partner or an associate. And then somehow in some correspondence it came out that he wasn't, and I believe he had to resign.
Well, you hear about these stories every now and again. I remember taking my California oral exam or supplemental exam, and everybody's generally the same age in that room, and there's one old gray-haired guy in the room, and I'm asking him, I'm trying to hint, who are you? Why are you here? Why are you not 24 years old or whatever, or 27? And it turns out he was in that exact position. He was I was made partner of the firm. I'm not licensed in the state, and the old guy is retiring, and I need to get a license quickly or we're screwed, basically.
Right. Which he had his license in some other state. He was just trying to get reciprocity. It sounds like.
I probably.
Yeah. All right, and the project architect is a role, we could be doing that for years. Like you say, there's career project architects, but we're probably looking at a good 8 to 10 years before any project architect positions would come our way.
Yes, and this does vary a little bit based on the project type. If you're doing, giant projects like courthouses or things that take 5 to 7 years from start to finish anyway, then yeah, it would take you that long. But just to finish them. But yeah, it's usually a 5 to 10 year type level of experience.
And project architects are probably working more than 40 hours a week, would be my guess.
Probably, yeah.
And then, okay, so middle years, we got our junior designer, job captain, senior designer, and project architect are sort of on the parallel, let's say. And then now we have the associate rounding out our middle years.
Now, associate is the transition between kind of middle management into some sort of full-fledged ownership, financial vested interest in the firm. So at your firm, you might see a lot of people with the title associate. In fact, the title of your firm might be Jane K. Doe and Associates. So
associate, but it's not a position in the firm.
It could be a position. There are some firms that have that as a position, but generally it's usually with some other title attached to it. Like they're referred to as one of the associates, but they're usually called a vice president or senior architect. Firms change this title quite a bit, but
would a project architect also be an associate?
A project architect could be an associate, meaning that they've said, okay, we're putting you on a new financial path where you have a vested interest in the financial health of the firm. Oftentimes they'll do this, believe it or not, to keep them from quitting and going to another office.
Of course, it's a financial incentive.
So one of the first firms I worked at, a great firm named Auguste Livera in Philadelphia, I ran into the old principal at an AIA convention, and he lost all his hair. He was bald as an eagle, and he looked, but he still had the same cute little face, right? And I said, Ted, how are you? And he had retired from the firm, and the guy who was the project architect, Dave, is now the partner of the principal of the firm. He basically sold the practice to Dave through some financial arrangement. So Dave was a project architect. He was made an associate before I even left, so he was already on that path, and now it's his firm.
Very cool.
That's kind of the way it works.
All right, so then let's talk about the full-fledged. We have our associate, we have our partner, principal, owner. All of those seem like it's like one thing. So can you explain that and sort of separate those for us?
Right. So there's associate, partner, principal, and owner. The partner, principal, and owner might be one person. So in the case of my small little firm, it was, right? I was the owner because I founded the firm. I was also the principal because I was running the day-to-day of the firm, and I didn't have any partners. But I was open to having partners. So an associate would be someone who now has a vested interest in the firm. They're probably given a title, something like senior this or vice president of that. They might even be called a senior associate as kind of a general term. And their responsibilities now keep growing. They're not just in charge of getting projects delivered on time and on budget. They're now also in charge of bringing work into the firm. I
was just going to ask you that. So as a sort of senior associate, for example, when we get into these higher levels, we are expected to bring work in. So in sort of their decision to put us on that track, they know we have the capabilities to bring work in, really.
Right, and oftentimes this will create rifts and tensions in the culture of the firm. Jane will be made a partner or senior associate, and Jim won't. Why? Because Jane has a better Rolodex, and she's able to bring in more work, or she'll have a better portfolio. Maybe she has a history of working in school projects. So when they submit a proposal for a school in an RFP, request for proposal type situation, Jane's portfolio and resume would attract more work than Jim's would. So they would promote her and not him. That happens all the time, and then Jim's pissed off and mad about it. Well, and you might witness all of this and wonder what's going on, and that's basically what's happening.
And Jim may be the better employee. Like, he may be better at his job. Yeah. But if you have somebody who has the ability to bring in work, I mean, that's the owners are gonna go for that. I mean, because that's gold. If you can bring in work to your firm, you can show up late. You can take naps all day. But if you can bring work into your firm, they'll let you do all that stuff.
Yeah, if you can make it rain. Basically, they'll be very happy with you. So you see this at the mid to large size firms where bringing in work, being responsible for getting your own work, is suddenly the big difference between what you were doing running projects and then this full-fledged or vested interest senior position in the firm.
So is partner sort of above an associate, or are they equal?
No, a partner is definitely above an associate, in that a partner now has not only a financial stake in the firm, both they reap the benefits of profits, but they also take the risk. They are a partner. It's they're listed as a, depending on the structure of the firm, if it's an S corp or whatever, they're listed there. If the firm goes bankrupt, it affects their credit. I mean, the partner has very much a vested financial stake in the firm, both the good and the bad. But a partner might not be a principal.
But let me back up there though. But a partner, because I know in law firms they do this, where you actually have to buy into the firm, like you have to pay money. I wonder if it works like that with sort of partners in the architectural world, like if there's a financial contribution you have to make.
It does, and usually because architects are the lowest paid professional of any, compared to doctors and attorneys and accountants and stuff. Usually the partnership agreement, you're buying into the firm over a period of time where they're almost withholding a raise or withholding pay so you can buy in without feeling a financial hit, because it's not like architects have $50,000 lying around that they can just buy into a firm with, and they probably wouldn't get approved for a loan. So usually what happens is you take a large firm, maybe the original founders are old and they're thinking of retiring. They brought up young people through the ranks through Project Architect and then made them associate for several years, and now they want to make them a partner. So they buy into the firm, and the way they do that is, instead of a raise this year, we're going to contribute that towards your stake, your ownership in the firm. Sometimes the firm is even broken into shares, and there are shareholders, and so you can even negotiate the amount of shares you have, because there might be multiple partners. And partners, the more shares you have, the more votes you have, on and on and on. So it's just like a normal business, but it's funny because it's usually never discussed out in the open. And you as an entry level person or an intern probably wouldn't hear any of those conversations ever.
Yeah, no, I've never heard it. The firm I worked for in New York, there was 3 partners there, and I was high level there. I was sort of project architect on sort of smaller jobs, but I've never heard those discussions. You wouldn't. It's funny because I have a friend who works in a well-known LA law firm, and he's I think he might be a partner now. He must be a partner because he was telling me about the buy-in. He's like our age, and he had to buy in a few years ago, which when the economy was good, it was like buying a house at the worst time. He kind of bought in at the worst time, and he essentially was making less than he made before he bought in because of the complications of the way the whole buy-in process works and all this stuff.
Right, and the firm might even do the financing for you in that case, but he's still paying it.
Exactly.
And so I have a friend who's an attorney, and he bought in 2006, and 2008 came along, and they lost all their clients and all their projects, and they had to shut their offices. And suddenly he's like, I bought in at this amount, and now it's only worth this amount. But you weather the storm just like with real estate, and you get through it.
Exactly. All right. So now what's the difference between a partner and a principal?
Well, you could have partners in a firm who are not involved in the day-to-day of the firm. A principal, often called the principal in charge, or you might have multiple principals, they're running the firm. They are the senior management of the firm. So they're the ones that are their direct reports are all of the senior associates, and all of their direct reports are all the project architects. So you have this kind of hierarchical tree of however many partners you have up top, and then reporting to them are the associates who are saying, yeah, these 30 projects, these 20, whatever, are happening well, here are problems. But a partner might be a financial partner or shareholder in the firm who's not involved. It's very rare, but it happens. Sometimes you'll see that when you have a senior partner who retires, but
right.
they keep a financial stake for whatever reason.
Yeah, I don't see outside investors investing in an architecture firm as sort of a viable investment strategy.
No, yeah, it wouldn't be a good way to make money. But what you would see is you'd see maybe the original founder of the firm, their name is on the door, their name still has value. So as a result, they still keep a certain number of shares. So they would be one of your partners. They might even have a vote in the trajectory of the firm, but they're not running the day-to-day. It's a rare situation, but you see it in places like the large firms, HRK, SOM, and Gensler, where they've had generations now go through, and the current principals who run the firm weren't even born when the firm might have been made. I assume you'd usually have less principals than partners in a firm, or not necessarily. Well, they might be synonymous. They might. Okay. The principal, the partner might be the same, number. You might only have one, right? I ran a one. It was just me and then my staff, and so I was the sole principal. But I was.
You wouldn't have a firm, even the bigger firms. There's not a whole bunch of principals.
You might. In fact, you might have principals based on offices. So, if you take a firm that has 14 offices, you might have a principal just for that regional office. So the LA office might have 5 principals for all you know, depending on how big the firm is. But yeah, usually the principal is generally licensed in the state that the firm that office is located in, and in charge of at least that one office or maybe that region.
Right.
You'd have to be. It has. It's the big boss.
And then we have the owner, who is usually a principal or one of the principals in some capacity or another.
Yes, exactly.
So I could let's say we have sort of a medium-sized firm. I'm the owner and principal. I'm the only owner. I'm a principal, and I have other principals who are brought on. I mean, they might have some minor stake in the firm, but I'm still would be considered the owner, but there's still several principals there.
And their stake in the firm might be on a schedule, a vesting schedule, it's called, similar to if you've had any friends that work for a .com business, where the longer they stay, the more shares they get in the firm. And again, it's a way to entice to retain good talent, to make sure that they don't leave and go somewhere else. It's really designed to keep you there and have you stay.
Okay, so that's a good overview. Our 3 groups, again, entry, middle years, and full-fledged. And inside our entry, we have the intern, draftsperson, junior designer. And then the middle years, we have our junior designer, job captain, senior designer, project architect, and then we start getting into associate. And then our full-fledged is associate, partner, principal, owner. And I guess just to recap the years, entry, 0 to 5 years. And then the middle years, we start getting into the job captain area. So 5 to 10 years, job captain stuff. And then the project architect, probably 8 to 10 years would be my guess.
And you'll see these same numbers appear on job postings, right? Go to your local AIA chapter website and click on the jobs section that they have, and you'll see it's basically in those same 3 buckets. Entry-level position, less than 5 years, it'll say. Middle years, it'll say 5 to 10. And full-fledged, it'll just say 10 plus. It's funny because, they always joke that architecture is an old person's profession because it takes you that long to really get good at it, right? But after 10 years, we don't even bother making the distinction, right? I'm going on, 25 years of experience, which sounds crazy. But if I was looking for a job, it would be a 10 plus.
You're right, exactly. Yeah.
Nobody's going to advertise a 20 plus year. It just doesn't happen.
And actually, I was just thinking, we've talked about interviewing before, but that's actually not a bad question to ask in an interview. Just ask sort of maybe about the firm structure, how many job captains do you have, or how many project architects, or something like that. Something about the firm structure. It
certainly speaks well to the firm if they have people that have been there for long periods of time. I mean, that says volumes about the quality of the day-to-day life, of the culture of the firm. It's a fun place to work, and the work is intriguing and interesting enough to hold people. If you come into a firm and everybody there has been there less than 2 years, that's a red flashing warning sign that there's something not right.
Although I agree with you, but the flip side of that is if we put our devil's advocate hat on for a second, when you go into when you're new at a firm where people have been there forever, some of those people don't like the new people coming in. They don't like those young people because they know their job's going to be in jeopardy at some point.
Yeah, there's some weird, I'd worked at a handful of firms, but I've consulted to probably almost 100 different firms where I've been, in the firm working side by side with them as their consultant, and you see some weird personalities, man. There's some strange, but you just meet a lot of very strange characters in firms, and sometimes you'll even be able to see this, that their own personalities are prohibiting them from advancing in the firm.
Of course, absolutely, and it just there should be a reality show of architects. I mean, architecture firms, right?
It would be great because then people would actually know what we do for a living. It would be kind of great to have, actually. Let's pitch that. We'll pitch it to Bravo or somebody.
We need some drama, though. I'm sure we can find some somewhere.
Yeah.
Alrighty, well, that's going to do it. Wrap it up for this podcast. Eric, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
My name is David Doucette, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thanks for listening to the ARE Podcast. Be sure to visit architectexamprep.com and check out our other podcast episodes, video tips, and the ARE blog. Remember to plan, practice, and pass.